And of course, analysts are saying there may also be a further blow to economic growth from the two-day nationwide strike in Indonesia that got underway today. Workers want more pay, healthcare coverage, and a ban on outsourcing. They've been on the streets for the first day today. The turnout perhaps not as high as people had been expecting. Let's get some perspective on the labour conditions in Indonesia. Peter van Rooij is the director of the Jakarta office of the International Labour Organization, and he joins me now. Peter, thank you for being with us. Let's just talk a little bit in general about the conditions of the Indonesian labour force and put them in a Asian context, if you could. Are conditions there significantly different to the rest of Asia? And tell us a bit about the history of the labour movement that's brought us to this point.
Yes, good evening. The Indonesian worker situation is quite similar with a number of countries in the region in terms of, for example, the size of the informal economy, more than 50%, in terms of issues like education and skills training, also in terms of unemployment rates. So this is very much similar to countries like the Philippines and Thailand. With respect to the labor situation in terms of organized labor, we see that a lot has happened over the last 15 years. We see that freedom of association on the basis of ILO conventions is in place. We see that Indonesian unions started to organize themselves, and over the last 2 years we see that they're actually getting quite well organized and stronger, including in getting their issues on the table and across to the media.
Are the relations between the workforce and the unions, the employers and the unions, within ILO recommended parameters?
Very much so in terms of freedom of association. Like I mentioned, not only the unions over the last 2 years particularly are getting better organized, not only as individual unions but also cooperation among themselves, but also the employers in Indonesia, represented by APindo, is quite well organized. So the context of having strong industrial relations are there. However, we also see that there are a number of issues that are being discussed and are particularly getting a lot of attention at this time of the year when the minimum wages for the next year are being set. So there are some challenges out there to make this cooperation effective in terms of results and with a long-term perspective.
But the question that pops up immediately is, why is it that we're having this scale of action when it was only less than a year ago when we had resolution to an equally big condition? Why is it that we're back where we started?
Well, first, to put things in perspective, until about 1.5 years ago, the purchasing power of wages in Indonesia had hardly budged over a period of 10 years. So what you see over the last 2 years is perhaps somewhat of a catching up effect with the excellent economic growth that has taken place over the last couple of years. I guess there's also perhaps an element of, because of the effect and the success of last year, that this may be an inspiration to see to what extent this could be repeated. But I also think it's very important to put in perspective even what happened over the last 1.5 years. For example, this year, while a lot of media attention goes out to the 44% increase in the minimum wages in Jakarta, we see that overall for the country the increase this year was 18%.
So your point here being that the conditions are not necessarily as being portrayed?
Well, I think that's part of the picture, and I think more importantly we should look at what are the constraints for competitive business in Indonesia, and we see that the issues of labor doesn't come up in the top 3 or top 5. We hear more about issues like infrastructure, we hear more about issues like governance, and to the extent that it is about labor, we also hear about issues like skills and competencies. So yes, it is an issue to talk about wages, but we should also put it in perspective. And when we talk about wages, we should look at the underlying issues, because I think one of the key points is that for many people, their wages are at or around the minimum wage. So the function of minimum wages is actually twofold, not only a safety net, but also the real wage. So if that could be decoupled over time, then we can focus more on the real issues, which are how wages can be in line with productivity and quality.
All right, Peter, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for talking to us. Peter van Rooij is with the International Labour Organization from Jakarta.